Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink with another mixed media style card. Basically, I was mucking around, was filming it, and turned it into a card. I had a rough idea in my head where I was going with this, and it was just like white space and shimmer and splatter, and that's as far as it went in the beginning, because I know a lot of people, it's interesting to know like the thought process. So of course that's what I try and share in all my videos. But when it comes to stuff like this, it's hard to explain because it's like things just kind of take on a little life of their own. But I have some Tim Holtz Distress white heavy stock here, and you could use like watercolor paper, just something that can handle, a lot of things. Heavy stock being one of my favorites. So I pulled out a couple pieces of heavy stock. I laid out my flour sack cloth just because I knew I was going to get a little messy. And then I pulled out some random colors of some Lindy's magical shimmer powders. I've used these in several videos. I have an entire playlist of videos I've done using shimmer powders, both this brand as well as like the Tonic shimmer powders. And I will link to that playlist at the end because I've used them in tons of ways. You guys know I love me some shimmer and sparkle, and these are all super pretty. So I pulled out several just colors that appealed to me. It was like purples and pinks and that sort of a thing. And I have a random little palette here that I put some water in, and I was just scooping shimmer powder into it. And for this first little bit, I was just taking that, like after I'd like mixed it up, I just used a flat brush and was just painting those colors onto some of this heavy stock because I wanted to have some of the solid colors, and I was like, ooh, I could probably die cut these, So in the end, I end up left over, especially that narrow strip. I don't even end up using that, but I'll just save that for a future project because it's like, ooh, it is pretty. Once these dry, like, again, shimmer powders for the win, love. So painted those pieces first, and I was just doing it as I was adding these shimmer powders to the palette. And the 4 shimmer powders I use, I'll link to the collections, but I end up using like 1 from each because with the Lindy's they come in a set of 5, and you can't go wrong with any of them. I've been slowly collecting them because they're beautiful. Anyway, I used high maintenance magenta, beautiful, galactic teal, sweet violet purple teal, and Lara's wild mauve. Is that what it's called? That's what it says on the sticker. Cool. Anyway, they're beautiful. So for my main piece, I grabbed one of the largest paintbrushes I have. This is a size 14. This is like a Zen Royal and Langnickel brush. These brushes are super cheap. Simon started carrying them however many years ago, and I've just been like adding them to cart because literally they're a few dollars, dirt cheap. But anyway, this one is really big. I wanted like a big brush, and I just literally, like, I did that first little swirl, which I was like, ooh, I love how that turned out. And then each time I would add something, I would dry it. Same idea as with doing ink smushing, that sort of a thing. Wet into wet blends, wet on dry layers. So that's what I was going for here, is just layering up these bits and blobs of the shimmer powders. And of course, I'm adding a bit of splatter, that sort of a thing. I'm just using my little heat tool just to dry it so I don't have to sit here twiddling my thumbs in between each one. And on camera, of course, everything looks quite dark, but I will show at the end, the shimmer and all the fun stuff. So I also pulled out my splat box because I wanted to add more like splotchy, splattery whatevers. And it looks like a hot mess, but it's fun. And I'm planning on adding, die cuts and stenciling and black paint splatter. Why not? So once I finished adding the 4th color, and here and there, like I was using a paper towel to kind of soak up some of the excess because as always, I have a very heavy hand, and dried all of this. And then I pulled out my black soot distress paint to add a little bit of black splatter on top. And that I just shake up really, really well. And then I'm going to use my splat box again. Flour sack cloth is great, as you guys can see. I like the flour sack cloth when I'm doing like shimmer powders and stuff, because because they're so concentrated, the actual color in them, they get everywhere. Hence my flour sack towel being completely like stained, which is fine. And FYI, like I do wash this like once in a blue moon, like when it gets really like saturated. But I wash that with like my crafting cloths, like my microfiber cloths, etc. I do a separate load of that because last thing I need is, even though again, I craft in my pajamas half the time, or like I'm in sweatpants and a sweatshirt that, you know, ratty old clothes, whatever. But I don't wash the stuff with my actual clothing because I'm just scared that, you know, they'll stain. So anyway, after everything was dry, I used the picket fence. It's called the Pathways stencil. I like how it's very kind of geometric, sort of, you know, abstract, and a bit of Indigo Bunting paper glaze Luxe. This has like glitter in it. Oh, nerve. And I just applied a little bit over it, removed the stencil, went and washed the stencil immediately because you never want any type of like glitter glaze, anything like that to dry on your stencils because it's either a nightmare or nearly impossible to remove. So after I'd cleaned everything up, everything's dry. I die cut that one panel that I'd painted with the shimmer powders, and I used the Picket Fence Fanciful Feather wafer dies. Oh, the detail on these, seriously. So die cut those. And then my background, I die cut with one of the double stitched rectangle wafer dies because this set is meant double stitched layering rectangle. And that's meant for 5x7 cards because I was like, these panels are big enough, the dies are like larger, etc. Let's do a bigger card. So set all that aside, grabbed a scrap of, this is Simon's Peacock cardstock, and I put it in my Misty, and I used my anti-static powder tool, and then I stamped a sentiment from the Ways to Say Get Well stamp set, and I stamped that with clear embossing ink, coated it with detail white embossing powder, melted that with my heat tool. And then my card base is Simon Says Stamps smooth white cardstock. I had cut it down to 10 inches by 7 inches. And then I'm scoring it at 5 inches with my bone folder and my little score buddy. And this will make a 5x7 card base. So I score it really well. And then I reinforce that score, the fold, with the side of my bone folder. And then I've got my clean stencil here. I'm just going to hold this down, and I'm going to use Simon's Tide Pool Positively Saturated ink and one of my paper pouncers. And I'm just going to lightly pounce a bit of ink over this. The stencil is not as big as the card base. Plus, I don't need the whole pattern. I just wanted to add that little extra something to the inside of the card. So I just lightly pounce the ink. So I'll have a little darker areas, a little lighter areas, and then it just like fades out to white. So pounce that around onto the inside of the card. Once I was happy with that, I'm going to fold the card inside out so I can fit it into my Misty. And I'm just going to use a little bit of tape to hold the card closed so that it's not flopping up and getting in the way when I, stamp my sentiment. So tape that closed, put it into my Misty, and then I'm going to use the large Thinking of You sentiment from that same Ways to Say Get Well stamp set. And lined that up. Had to line it up a couple times because, again, this is why grid lines on things and T-square rulers, I talk about this a lot. All the help I can get to straighten things out and, all that stuff. So, got that lined up, inked up the stamp with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, stamped that onto the inside of the card. And then the smallest of the 3 Fanciful Feather die cuts, I'm going to adhere that to the inside of the card. And I'm just using some Craft Tacky Glue. And I've shown this in a bunch of videos. I have one of these little Gina K detail glue bottles that I filled with Simon's Craft Tacky Glue forever ago, whenever it was. It's been a few months now. And again, so far so good. Like, hasn't clogged. This is a thicker glue. It's just my glue of choice. I've been using it for years. But there's a lot of good glues on the market now. So whatever works for you. But if you want like detail application, these little Gina K bottles are it. They are chef's kiss. And I have a link to them, like all the other supplies. So anywho, got that adhered. And then my little sentiment there, I trimmed it down with my guillotine trimmer. And then I used my scissors to trim the little edges there, which I haven't done in forever. And another thing I haven't done forever. Oh, you guys, a lot of you might remember my favorite black and white stripe pattern paper from MFT. Still been hoarding that. Still love it. You can see I keep every scrap of this paper. It used to like make an appearance on like every single card. It's making a comeback. I pulled it out and I was like, oh yes, I remember how much I love this paper. So I trimmed down, a scrap of it. And I'm going to add these to the card front once I start assembling. And then the other thing I did is I die cut some scraps of white cardstock with this large hello die. This comes in the double stitched layering rectangle die set. And I die cut it a couple times from just scraps of white cardstock. And the top layer I die cut from glossy white cardstock. So it'll have a nice shine to it. So I'm going to stack those together with the glue to give it all the dimension that I love. Once that's adhered, then I can start like assembling this card front panel. So I'm going to adhere though the remaining two Fanciful feather die cuts to this background that's obviously now dry. I've die cut it, so I've got that double stitching line around the perimeter as well, which I'm just kind of obsessed with this die set right now. I'm going to adhere these into place. Once those are adhered, I'm just going to stick my big acrylic block just to hold things down. Just little dabs of glue here and there. That's all it's needed. I don't bother putting glue on like every little spot. It's not necessary. It's gluing paper to paper. It's simple. And little bits are going to pop up, and that just adds to the dimension of it all. So got that. Let that glue dry for a couple minutes. And then for the sentiment, I'm going to adhere that little sentiment strip to the pattern paper first. So just a little bit of glue. And then another kind of oldie but goodie favorite, I pulled out my tiny attacher. It's mixed media when the tiny attacher comes out. This is, seriously, I don't know. Some may not have heard of this, but this is a Tim Holtz tool. This has been out for a bajillion years. I don't even know how long I've had mine. Like probably a decade. Forever. Best little stapler. Literally, this thing I use all the time, just not on cards. I use it when I'm doing like my taxes. When I have things to attach, like bills and documents and all that kind of stuff, that's the stapler I use because it is just so good. So good. Anyway, again, I think you might be a crafter if you just have a thing for office supplies, like good quality ones, Anyway, I could go on a tangent there. So I adhered everything to the card front. Then on the back, I used Simon's Big Mama foam tape. This will give a bit of dimension, just a bit, don't need a lot. But this also will help adhere this panel to the card base and like flatten it because it's still, even after die cutting, like it's still a little bit warped from like the liquid, the heat, all the things I was adding to it. So I popped that onto the card base with that bit of foam tape, and then gotta add some more bling. So I have some Pink Fresh Aqua glitter drops. And then I also have some little hearts from the Picket Fence Neutral Hearts Embellishment Mix. So I added a few of those. I added a few little glitter drops just to tie it all together, So once I was kind of happy with the placement of those, I'm just going to adhere all those little bits with Craft Tacky glue. Just picking them up with my little wax tool, which again, I forget, Place and Score embellishment tool. And that finished off the card. So I'm going to use my flashlight so you guys can kind of get an idea of just like the shimmer and the sparkle. Told you that, like that embossing piece, that paper glaze Luxe, like look at the sparkle, seriously. And then the shimmer powders and the die cuts and the glossy cardstock and all the fun things. Like this was just fun. And in the end, 5x7 card, which I'm enjoying making these larger cards lately. So as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. In my blog post, it's picture links to all the supplies, so a little easier to navigate. I will also link at the end of this video to that playlist using shimmer powders. I don't even know how many videos offhand in there, so a bunch of ideas. And all the other info will be in the description box below the video. Thank you all so very much for watching, thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!